All right, ex-Army family, I have a great video for you today. I just conducted a phone interview with Dane Wigington via Skype. And let me tell you, he is a true American patriot. He's not just fighting to save our planet, he's fighting to save you and me and my children and your children and our grandchildren and all future humans to come. So please give this video a thumbs up and consider going to visit him at Geo-Engineeringwatch.org, which I'll link in the description after the interview. Before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dane Wigington. Dane has a background in solar energy. He is a former employee of Bechtel Power Corp and was a licensed contractor in California and Arizona. He has been engaged in constant climate geoengineering research for the last 15 years. His personal residence was featured in a cover article on the world's largest renewable energy magazine, Home Power. He owns a wildlife preserve next to Lake Shasta in Northern California. Dane put all his focus, efforts, and energy into researching the climate engineering issue when he began to lose very significant amounts of solar uptake due to the ever-increasing solar obscuration caused from jet aircraft spraying in the skies above his mountaintop home. He also noted a significant decline in forest health, which was occurring and appeared to be accelerating. Extensive testing and research into geoengineering issue was commenced and has continued since 2002. He is the lead researcher for www.geoengineeringwatch.org and has investigated all levels of geoengineering, from stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, SAG, to solar radiation management, SRM, to ionosphere heater facilities like HARP. Dane has appeared on numerous films and radio interviews in an effort to educate the public on the extremely dire environmental and health dangers we face from the ongoing global climate intervention programs. Dane lives in Shasta County, California. Wow, what a beautiful area. Look at that. But let's get into the interview. I hope you guys enjoy this. Make sure to hit that thumbs up. Yeah, and then I just wanted to talk to you in general, and also the closest people in my group. They submitted about 15 questions they wanted me to ask you, and if you have time, I'll
Absolutely.
ask you some of those.
Absolutely, I appreciate their willingness to try to explore the issue further, but I'm glad to fill in those blanks. No problem.
Okay, so let's start with if you want to know my background. I started my YouTube channel. I built a night vision telescope, and I was looking up at the sky, and as the years have went by, it's gotten to the point where there's only a clear sky about 2 nights out of every 2 weeks. And I found a direct correlation. If there are long contrails or chemtrails, which you said we'd talk about in a minute, if those are in the sky during the day, I know for a fact that at least the next 2 nights I am not going to be able to stream the sky. And that's what got me interested in the topic. And I decided to tackle it first from a skeptic's point of view. And I talked to Mick West, and I will tell you, my friends, followers, subscribers were absolutely furious that I talked to Mick West. They are like, you have to talk to Dane Wigington, John. So I started researching you, and you for sure have the biggest amount of information and research of anyone on the internet. So that's how I found you.
It's been my life for 15 years, and it's certainly not a job I wanted, but I had a background that was helpful for this issue, and I simply, my conscience will not allow me to look the other way.
Awesome. What did you mean by we don't call them chemtrails?
The chemtrails term is the instant marginalization term. Any official agency, any media, that term has no basis whatsoever in the science arena. So although I know it's a descriptive term and it may be useful in private conversation, it is absolutely extremely harmful to the credibility of the cause to try to make any mention of that term in the attempt to pass this information on to others. And there's more to that. If you're trying to introduce this issue and you pass that term on and someone goes back and Googles that term, they'll go straight to conspiracy theory and hoax.
Yeah.
If you stick to the science terms, climate engineering, geo-engineering, solar radiation management, you will find science, you will find hard data. And what you will see, Jonathan, is all the disinformation sites and sources will try to exclusively use that term. They won't use the science terms because they don't want people to search the science terms and find out that there is absolutely a basis to this issue. So again, we're playing chess. We need to learn to play well, and using the science terms keeps us on solid, credible ground.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so basically using the other term would discredit me and anything I was saying instantly, is what you're saying.
Unless you're in a private conversation where it doesn't matter. If you're communicating to any elected official, any agencies, any media, that is the instant marginalization term.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to start throughout our talk, I'm going to go to some of my friends' questions, because the first thing everybody wants to know is there a way to protect ourselves from the chemicals that they are spraying?
In the short term, somewhat. In the long term, no. So let me clarify. Can we and should we attempt to chelate these metals out of our system? Yes, absolutely. How do we know those metals are there? We have lab tests from all over the globe. We have about 70 from Northern California alone. This is what started my journey down this 15-year trench of trying to expose this issue. So we know from lab tests at state-certified labs that these highly toxic heavy metals that are primary elements in climate engineering patents and operations, starting with aluminum, barium, strontium, lead, manganese, but aluminum being a primary factor, we know this material is raining down through the air column. Our lab tests prove it. And the amount coming down is in massive quantities. And you'll hear disinformation sites and sources say, well, aluminum is very abundant in the Earth's strata, about 8% of the Earth's strata. We would expect to see it everywhere. That is an absolute, blatant, glaring lie. Aluminum, let me say this clearly, aluminum does not exist in the environment in free form, period. It is not bioavailable. The only way it can be coming down through our air column in free form, in bioavailable form, which means it's readily absorbed by our system and the whole web of life, the only way it can be there is if it's been mined and refined and sprayed, period. So leading back to your original question, yes, we are being exposed to unimaginably toxic elements. They are absolutely connected to the climate engineering operations. And for example, on the West Coast, where people might say, well, it's coming from China. No, also not true. And this is all information that none of the disinformation sites or sources will volunteer, because they know that would reveal that this issue is in fact ongoing. We have CARB studies, California Air Resource Board studies on the aerosols migrating from Asia. Aluminum, for example, not amongst those aerosols because it cannot migrate across such distances. Only mercury can. So again, we have study and peer-reviewed reports to back up our conclusions at geoengineeringwatch.org. So back to the chelating. Every person, every human subject that we have tested, hair, blood, and urine, they're packed with these metals. Mm-hmm. We have to keep them migrating through our system to keep them from building up because they're bioaccumulative also. So chelating elements, and chelating has to be done very carefully. There are supplements, even common supplements, vitamin C and calcium are chelators. But I would recommend people talk to a nutritionalist. Chelation must be done carefully. You can't do it too aggressively or you will do more harm than good. But to keep these elements moving through our system, to keep us as healthy and sharp as we can while we're fighting climate engineering, because if we don't stop climate engineering, all the efforts to keep our own personal health will not matter. Life on Earth will perish. And I'm not blaming everything on climate engineering. I want to state that clearly. We've been horrible stewards of our planet. This is important to understand and remember. Every form of human activity that alters the energy balance of the planet is a form of geoengineering. It's altering the natural equilibrium and balance that was once here. But that being said, the single greatest disrupting factor we face today, the single greatest threat we face today, short of nuclear cataclysm, is climate engineering. And the list of reasons why is long. But back to, again, your original question. Yes, let's stay healthy. Let's try to chelate, get guidance to do that. But at the same time, we must focus on stopping climate engineering, or nothing else will matter in the very near term.
Okay. Here's something myself and a lot of other people are wondering that you might have a great idea about. Do you think that, I hate to go down the conspiracy road, but do you think that geoengineering, climate engineering is a necessary evil, or do you think it's part of a greater plan to, say, reduce our world's population to a more manageable number that could easily be, I hate to go crazy on you, but be enslaved? Do you think there's a sinister agenda, or do you think it's a necessary evil?
Let me back into this first. I think it should be clear to most who are even slightly awake that the whole conspiracy theory term is very useful to the power structure. And this term is used by all disinformation sources and sites to describe any information that does not correlate with official narratives or that disputes official narratives. So that term is freely used by anyone who is there to protect official government narratives, which we know, anyone who's even slightly awake knows that the one thing we can be sure that our government does in an unimaginably prolific fashion is lie and lie and lie. So that term alone, again, I don't think we should let that bother us or scare us. About geoengineering, this is also important. It is a very, very complex scenario that's being carried out in our skies. There are many, many agendas and many layers to those agendas. So to try to answer your first question, is there anything benevolent in these programs? The answer is an absolute resounding no. No, there is no benevolence, but it's important to remember, even though these programs are ultimately about power and control with many agendas, those carrying out these programs, military members and so forth, are being told what they're doing is for the greater good. Jonathan, much like the pilots in Vietnam who sprayed their comrades on the ground with Agent Orange were told this is for the greater good, much like the soldiers that dropped depleted uranium bombs in areas where their fellow soldiers were operating, contaminating them forever and all the civilians, same thing. They're told this is for the greater good. So back to climate engineering, primary agendas. And again, there are many more, but you have an ionizing of the atmosphere. That makes the atmosphere more electrically conductive, more conducive for various forms of communication, more conducive for over-the-horizon radar, electromagnetic pulse offense and defense. But going back to more core issues, going back to when these programs started and first fully deployed right after World War II, the coming greenhouse gas buildup, and this is not about Al Gore or carbon credits, but the damage being done to the planet. These gases don't float out into outer space. We live in a fishbowl. Yeah. They build up. So in the attempt to mask the severity of what was happening from the public and to use weather as a weapon, and that's very critical. Weather warfare is a matter of historical fact. It's not opinion. So in order to use weather as a weapon, in order to mask the consequences of manipulating the weather, and in order to keep business as usual, to keep power consolidated, to use this power, this covert weapon of war, which again, weather warfare is their crown jewel. It's the crown jewel of the power structure because they can destabilize and topple nations without those nations ever even knowing they went to war. We have many examples of this, not just Vietnam, but we have countries like Iran stating on the record in recent years that NATO weather modification programs are cutting off their precipitation. That's another subject. But the bottom line is dozens and dozens and dozens of countries have been brought to their knees by weather warfare without those countries even knowing they went to war. So this was a covert weapon of the power structure. They needed to mask the severity of biosphere implosion from the public because otherwise the public might not support this activity. Of course, they wouldn't support it. So you have those two aspects, weather warfare, masking the severity of damage under the planet while doing even more damage at the same time. To your other question of eugenics, these elements are highly toxic. Those in power know how toxic they are. They know it affects our cognitive ability, our ability to think clearly. A population that cannot think clearly is certainly far easier to manipulate and to control. And we have former presidential advisors like Zbigniew Brzezinski stating on the record that with today's technology, before he died, this is an advisor going all the way back to President Johnson, stating on the record that it was far easier today to kill 1 million people than to control them. I think that writing on the wall is abundantly clear. So Are all of these aspects and many more a part of the overall equation? Yes. So it's important for credibility's sake when people are trying to answer the question of why are they geoengineering, don't give a single answer, because that is not a complete picture by any means. It's important to know that there are many, many agendas, but all of them malevolent, none of them for the greater good.
Awesome. I hope you don't mind with me hitting you with a barrage of questions. I just, me and some of my subscribers, we felt like getting you on was such a great opportunity that I'm sorry, but I have a ton of questions for you. Are you okay
Fire
with
away.
that?
Fire away. And I don't care how skeptical a person may be. If it's honest skepticism, I am more than happy to field any question you have.
Okay. Another big one I got a couple times for you was, and these are coming from people who obviously believe that they are spraying chemicals in our sky, but their biggest question is, in your opinion, what do you think the people who are carrying out these programs, do they do something different to protect themselves than we do? Because obviously they're spraying theirself and their own family too.
It's a very important question. Why would they do this to themselves? Now, there's two aspects to that question. First, let's examine what other horrific and permanently damaging activities the power structure has inflicted on themselves and the rest of the planet. Let's start with the detonation of over 2,000 nuclear weapons, which has contaminated every single living organism on this planet. Let's look at Fukushima. That is an ongoing nuclear cataclysm, triple nuclear volcano, no end in sight, no technology to fix it, and yet we're building 60 or 70 more nuke plants right now. We have about 400 online already, 400 plus. And on the current course, once those plants can no longer cool themselves and grids start to shut down, we're going to have Fukushima times several hundred, but they continue to build more. Now, we have, again, a long list of other activities that are contaminating the entire web of life. Regarding climate engineering and the buildup of toxic heavy metals, do those in power have some means of at least temporarily exempting themselves from some of the symptoms? The answer is yes. There's chelating facilities, one that we know of in Germany, that a Norwegian researcher that we communicated with at geoengineeringwatch.org, he was able to get into this facility, have his whole system chelated in a very high-tech process that pulls the blood from the body. He was given the contaminants that were pulled from his blood after that extensive 24-hour process. It's something that's not available to the rest of us. It's just a very advanced form of chelation that would likely exempt those in power from some of the symptoms, at least for the short term. So the answer is yes, they seem to have technology available to them that is not available to us, that would at least keep them healthier than we are.
Wow, that's great. I'm going to have to look into chelation because I until this call, I'd never even heard of that before. I know also I was in the military, and you used a term a minute ago, the greater good. And that is exactly how we were programmed to operate in the military. Nothing matters. It's for the greater good. It doesn't matter if my feet hurt. It doesn't matter if I'm frostbit. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's a common tone in the military.
It's a very sick, twisted thing about the system, if you will, that capitalizes on the honorable motives of people like yourself that were there, and I salute those motives. I want to make that clear, because the military is filled with people who are there with honorable motives, but I would ask them to consider that the motive alone is not enough. One has to analyze and examine what they're being made to do. And if you know much about Pat Tillman and what happened to him once he abandoned multi-million-dollar football contracts, signed up after 9/11, and went and actually saw the criminal activity that was going on and was going to speak about it publicly, and people would have listened to Pat Tillman. He was very intelligent.
Yeah, definitely.
And if your listeners don't know what happened to Pat Tillman, he was taken out and literally assassinated by our own military. A big smoke and mirrors facade occurred, claiming it was a military or a foreign occupying force ambush, and they burnt all his personal materials. I mean, it is an absolute crime. Any quote-unquote true patriotic American should be absolutely unimaginably infuriated at what was done to him, and yet we hear nothing. So thank you for sharing what you went through. And this whole process, this military industrial juggernaut of total insanity that's about empire. It's not about freedom. It's not about democracy. It's about empire. And the empire doesn't care any more about the American citizens than it does foreign citizens. So I think the climate engineering, back to that issue, they are dumping daily millions of tons of toxic nanoparticulates. And by the way, the smaller the particulate, the more harmful it is. These are nanoparticulates. And we mentioned, just to back up on one thing, Jonathan, how we all know how toxic, most people know how toxic aluminum is. They know how toxic mercury is. But when you combine these two metals, both of which we all have in us now, the combination of the two can increase overall toxicity by 100 times. It's 10,000% more toxic. This is happening in all of us. It's a wonder any of us are walking and talking and still functioning, because we are inhaling these materials with every breath we take. Our government is doing this to us, and other governments around the globe doing this to their populations as well. They're all colluding and cooperating. I'm not singling out our own government.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, we're in a fight for life right here, right now.
Wow. The Pat Tillman, I'm going to have to look into that. I didn't even realize he passed away overseas, and that was back in 2004. How did I miss that? He
took 3 rounds at close range in the forehead from an M16 from his own group. And there's very extensive data on what happened to him, that his materials were burnt. They did not want him to speak out, which he was preparing to do, was laying the groundwork for, and they simply put an end to it.
Wow, that's horrible.
Yes, it is.
A lot of these questions we addressed. Does geoengineering affect the weather? Yes, 100%.
I can elaborate on that. If you can. I'll answer these quickly and concisely, so you can go through all of them. As far as the weather goes, we can consider no weather natural at this point. If you affect any part of the system, you infect the whole system. And in fact, we can find no place on satellite imagery that's not being saturated with atmospheric aerosol dispersions. So because of this is why in documents we have posted at geoengineeringwatch.org, which we were the first to find and post, your listeners can search. In fact, it's good to search on the Bing search engine or DuckDuckGo, because Google has done their best to completely ghost ban everything on our site, including taking, as I told you off the air, I think our geoengineeringwatch.org is now gone from a search of the term geoengineering. We were the top of the first page because we had 32 million visitors. They've completely taken us off all their pages, all 20. Search DuckDuckGo or Bing. But if they search any article subject on this issue, they can, if they search geoengineeringwatch.org wildfire engineering or geoengineeringwatch.org engineering cooldowns or any subject like that, they can find our articles on those sites. But again, back to the weather scenario itself, the document we found, if they search geoengineeringwatch.org, is what I was leading up to, massive Senate document, 800 pages long. And back to the question of any weather being natural, because you can't affect any part of the system without affecting the whole system. In that document, it specifically calls for the cooperation of otherwise opposing governments, i.e. China, US, Russia, on this issue because of the, quote, listen to this term, cross-border ramifications. It means that when you're geoengineering over your country, it affects everybody down the line. So is there any natural weather? No.
Wow, that's mind-blowing, because my subscribers from literally around the world, a lot of them in EU, Ireland, Australia, it's everywhere. It's every country that they're spraying in. Another question is, this is a great one. Hold on, where'd it go? He said, do you have a plan to help combat this, to help spark change, to stop it? Is there a plan of action at this point?
Yes, we're exercising many plans of action, but I want to state this. We've already filed a lawsuit in Canada that's ongoing. We've already filed legal action in the US. We're suing our attorneys. Geo-Engineering Watchdog has a legal team. We're suing the U.S. Department of Commerce. Why would we sue the U.S. Department of Commerce? Because they're the overseeing agency for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We're suing NOAA because NOAA was not releasing their Freedom of Information Act request to us. When our attorneys submitted those, our first response was this. NOAA basically, in about 3 or 4 sentences, said, we don't know anything about any type of weather modification anywhere, ever.
Wow.
I mean, consider what an absurd statement that is when NOAA is required to sign off on about 300 plus state and regional weather modification programs in the country every single year. And they had the audacity to tell us they don't know anything about any of this. When we sued them, then we got some of our FOIAs back. And here's back to, I'll get back to the plan in a moment, but here's what some of our Freedom of Information Act requests have already exposed to us. That the so-called weather forecast that the local meteorologists are giving are simply a script. That forecast is passed down from the very top, and the very top in this case is Raytheon, private defense contractor Raytheon, that does all the weather modeling for the National Weather Service and NOAA. So you have the geoengineers, which Raytheon is, patent holder and active geoengineering participant. They're the foxes running the hen house. They have to pass down the quote unquote forecast because in fact it's the scheduled weather. That's why the local meteorologists who are reading scripts, again, we know this. I'm not speculating.
Yeah.
And I don't want anybody on anything I say, by the way, don't believe anything I say. Please don't believe me. Please investigate the data that's posted on our site. So we have the local meteorologists reading scripts, and that's how they know days in advance that it's going to be, quote, mostly sunny. We hear that so often, mostly sunny, where there's not a natural cloud in the sky. It's all jet aircraft aerosol dispersions. Now, many would ask, well, why aren't some of the meteorologists speaking out? Why aren't NOAA scientists speaking out or National Weather Service? Because there's an illegal federal gag order on all of them. Not only do they have no First Amendment protection, but there's an illegal federal gag order. So for those all the disinformation sites, Jonathan, and sources that would try to have us believe that nothing's true except the official narrative. If you don't believe the official narrative, you must be in need of some sort of, psychiatric help. That's their job, to try to marginalize people with that sort of stigmatizing, while never referring to the science terms, while never citing the science facts, while never bringing up issues like, oh, by the way, there's an illegal federal gag order on all the National Weather Service and National Oceanic and Atmospheric scientists. Why in the world would you gag the weathermen if you didn't have something very, very big to hide?
Yeah, and also that's just like those YouTube compilation videos where every reporter around the country says the same exact sentence. Have you seen those on YouTube?
Absolutely scripted. You're exactly right.
Same. That's what it reminded me of when you said it comes down to the meteorologist.
Total scripts. And back to the plan again, for everybody listening, I want to state this, that even our legal efforts are ultimately about critical mass of awareness. I cannot state that term strongly enough. We cannot win this battle without an army of the awakened. We must awaken our military brothers and sisters, most importantly, so that they know they are killing their own, their families, their children. It's not for the greater good. And only by reaching a critical mass of awareness can we accomplish that. And if we do, we will have scientists pouring from every corner that know this is going on. I had a NOAA scientist state to my face off the record, we all know this is going on. We're, quote, alarmed as hell. We don't know what to do. We have no First Amendment protection. It's up to us, the public, to share credible data from a credible source, wake people up around you, ask them to do the same. If we can bring this issue to the light of day, you will see a shockwave around the globe, and the wheels will turn on their own, because ultimately even our legal efforts, and we are working as diligently as we can with the resources and manpower we have, but even our legal efforts are ultimately about reaching a critical mass of awareness. And once we do, the moment we do, there will be a paradigm shift. Our troubles will not be over, but if we can expose and stop climate engineering, we'll have taken the greatest single leap in the right direction we could take.
Yeah, and what do you think some of the effects are, which I'm assuming with aluminum, Alzheimer's is probably for sure an effect. I think you mentioned trouble thinking. What What type of effects do you think chemtrails are definitely having right now on the population? I'm sorry, I said chemtrails. I'm going to try to break that habit now that you've awoken me to geoengineering or spraying. What about the term STIs? Is that their term or no? The stratospheric something injection, aerosol injection?
That's SAI.
SAI.
Stratospheric aerosol injection. That's a science term. You have cloud albedo enhancement. There's a lot of other acronyms. Now, let me back into this. First, again, we're not speculating, hypothesizing, theorizing about the particulate matter falling down through our atmosphere. It is there. Our lab tests absolutely conclusively prove that. It's there in unimaginably high quantities. We are all inhaling this material. We're not guessing or speculating or hypothesizing about the effects. We have peer-reviewed study to prove that these materials do unimaginable damage to the human system. In fact, cause such a long list of diseases, I can't even begin to go into it here. But as far as cognitive function, we have internationally recognized experts like Dr. Russell Blaylock. In fact, his statements are in our 20-page geoengineeringwatch.org fact and photo summary booklets. Those can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. That PDF can be shared. They can be ordered at our approximate cost of producing and shipping. We're only trying to get them in circulation. But Dr. Blaylock in our booklet states that the danger posed by this geoengineering fallout, and this is an internationally recognized Western medical mainstream scientist, physician, that these particles are so small they're absorbed very readily through our nasal passages, our olfactory nerve. They go straight into the bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier where they do immense damage. So we see every single human ailment going off the scale that we would expect to see from this fallout, starting with cognitive dysfunction, our ability to think. So even if someone doesn't have an Alzheimer's diagnosis, doesn't mean that they're thinking clearly or anywhere close to what they would have had they not been exposed. So if we look at Alzheimer's and dementia, it's the number one cause of death now in the UK. Number one. Wow. It's third here officially. One of 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's and or dementia, not necessarily from, but with it. And we see IQs dropping, Jonathan, in the continental U.S., 6 to 9 points. 6 to 9 points. That is astronomically high. We are getting dumber by the day, and I don't say that facetiously. This is a very real fight for life. So all of this, as I stated in the beginning of this broadcast, serves those in power. So can we say with absolute certainty that climate engineering fallout is causing these types of ailments? Absolutely, positively, yes. Whatever else is in the equation, and I'm not saying there isn't other factors in the equation, other sources of pollution or contamination, we're being assaulted from every direction. But the mathematically single greatest source of these particulate exposures is climate engineering.
Yeah, I will definitely agree. All you have to do is go walk around town for a few hours, and I can literally tell a difference from 10 years ago. Do you know what I'm saying? People are just in a walking dream everywhere I go. They don't know what's going on around them. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's horrible. It's horrible.
It is. You shared with me, I believe it was off the air, that you're searching the skies at night and seeing the obscuration. You couldn't see as clearly. Now, if I could share my background, how I got into this, I have a background in solar power. I work for Bechtel Power. They're the largest engineering firm in the world. I was working in the renewable energy aspect. My off-grid home, I have wind, solar, and hydro. It was the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. When I built this home in Northern California, expecting to be under clean, clear skies, I was losing massive amounts of my solar uptake on many days because of whatever these aircraft were emitting. No natural clouds in the sky. Now, I couldn't imagine something on this scale could be going on without me knowing about it, especially given my background. But I began to test the precipitation to see if the elements named in climate engineering patents were in the precipitation. I didn't want to find it there because I knew it would change the course of my life, and so it did. Yeah. The last 15 years I've been in this trench because I can't do otherwise. My conscience will not let me do otherwise. But the bottom line is, it is not condensation obscuring our skies, losing 60, 70, even 80% of my solar power uptake. That is absolutely not condensation. And I would ask your listeners to consider this. Again, not to believe anything I say, but to use their own sense of reason. when we see one aircraft leaving a trail from horizon to horizon next to another leaving nothing, something is clearly wrong. When we see an aircraft, and we have up-close film footage of tankers, military tankers, C-17s, KC-135s, KC-10s, nozzles visible, turning on and off, film taken from behind the aircraft from other people that remained anonymous. That's clearly a spray dispersion. We have up-close photographs of the nozzles, retrofit nozzles mounted on the pylon, aimed into the exhaust jet stream to make it look like, quote, condensation. So when those from academia try to claim that, well, it's just the plane entering different layers of the atmosphere, atmosphere is layered horizontally, not vertically. So when you see a plane flying horizontally and a trail shutting on and off, it's not entering different vertical layers of the atmosphere. The atmosphere doesn't layer that way. And I know the disinformation sites will try to
say that the temperature varies from 50 feet to 50 feet.
Not vertically. No, that's a lie.
Yeah,
so the bottom line is, and in the last decades, upper troposphere temperatures are going up. Atmospheric RH, relative humidity, is going down. Both of those conditions making a, quote, condensation trail even less likely. And consider when you see someone walking around, let's just go with common sense here for a minute, aside from the mountains of science data we have. You see people in Antarctica walking around with their breath condensing. You see them walking a mile and having a big cloud hanging behind them. Be real. This is not how condensation does not behave in this manner. And on a high bypass turbofan jet engine, there's a full tutorial at geoengineeringwatch.org. It's important to understand what that engine is. It's and I know the disinformation sorts and sizes, they'll dispute anything we say. If we said the Earth was round, they would try to prove it's flat. That's their mentality, to disprove anything that doesn't fit with official narratives. High bypass turbofan jet engine, full animation of that engine at geoengineeringwatch.org. It is a jet-powered fan. This is important what I'm about to say. 90% of the air that passes through that is non-combusted. It's just a fan. It is, by design, nearly incapable of producing any, quote, condensation trail, except under very rare circumstances. So, again, if we look at the totality of data, let's stop in one, and I'll give the mic back to you, Jonathan. When we have the U.S. military stating on the record, and they just did this again in a headline a couple days ago, the greatest national security threat of all is the disintegrating climate. Does any halfway awake rational person believe that the military is going to sit around and wait for the population to ask them to engineer the climate? Have they ever asked our permission to do anything? To detonate 2,000 nuclear bombs, to blow up islands in the South Pacific, to test on U.S. civilians, hundreds of documented biological warfare tests on innocent U.S. civilians? I could go on, but I mean, the bottom line is this is real. I focused everything on this issue because it is the single greatest threat we face, bar none, short of nuclear cataclysm.
Yeah, and it brings to mind the Agent Orange again. My father, who did a couple tours in Vietnam, he's still alive. He's doing good. He's kicking. But unfortunately, because of that poisoning he suffered, you should see the blotches up his arms and hands and the bruising. And that's caused from Agent Orange. A lot of people don't know that. It was sprayed from the skies to kill the foliage in Vietnam. And literally, he has patches that just come and go as big, huge bruises from those chemicals while he served in the military.
And that's how our government treats our soldiers. It's not about patriotism. It's about serving the empire. So, Jonathan, you probably know what depleted uranium is. For your listeners that don't, that's the radioactive waste, uranium-238, that is used in U.S. munitions, that was used in the Middle East, that our soldiers were not told about. They weren't told that it's going to leave those areas radioactive forever. Gulf War syndrome related to that. And it's interesting. I live in an area where a lot of people claim to be patriotic in Northern California, but their form of patriotism is to wave their flags and never question the official narrative. And that's not patriotism. That's tyranny. Yeah. That's blind herd conformance tyranny. So I brought a 15-year U.S. Marine vet, a medic from a family of Marines. I brought him to Reading twice to speak about depleted uranium. Did any of the vets or so-called patriotic people, I don't want to single out the vets, but the so-called flag-waving people that probably never gave service, did they show up to listen to what that man had to say? No. They didn't. So we have a lot of paper patriotism going around, and I hope that changes. And I've given to DAV for 20 years. I gave to VFW, if for your listeners who don't know what that is, Veterans of Foreign Wars and Disabled American Veterans. I work rehabbing NAM vets. So it's not about, I mean, I salute the motive of our military brothers and sisters, but I'm begging them to start facing the truth and not blindly following orders.
Yeah, definitely. Sabrina has a question. Name the companies paying for chemtrails. Have we been able to find any actual companies at this point? I think you said Raytheon was one of them?
Okay, Raytheon's one of the contractors involved, but let's back up. Who is paying for this? Who's ultimately responsible?
The taxpayer.
Not even the taxpayer. Let's go above that. Because we have the dollar is the global reserve currency, so we have the central banks, and those who control the central bankers can print whatever they want out of thin air for whatever they want. Thus we have, and your listeners, I encourage them to search, investigate every fact I cite.
Yeah.
We have officially the Pentagon missing from 21 to 30 trillion dollars since the late 90s. Not billion, trillion. 21 to 30 trillion dollars. First, we have to ask, where did that money come from to begin with? Yeah. And how do you lose up to 30 trillion dollars? So we're talking about an empire, because the dollar was the global reserve currency, because that was enforced after World War II. That's what gave our country the hegemonic power it has. We have central bankers that can print whatever they want for whatever they want. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and what we've been talking about on my channel is how they don't even print it anymore. They literally make it with ones and zeros from bank to bank over the computer. They don't even have to print it anymore. Matter of fact, they make so much that they couldn't print it if they wanted to.
I mean it metaphorically when I stated, but yes, they're manufacturing it out of thin air on computer screens, yes.
Somebody wanted to know, are there planes actually being flown by human beings, or are they controlled remotely like drones?
We can't know that answer. We don't cite or offer a conclusion unless we have a means of backing it up. We can't know. Is the technology available for a lot of these planes to be remotely guided? Of course, it is there, but we can't know. And certainly we know this, that there are more than enough people, as long as it provides a paycheck and a pension, that are willing to do whatever they're told. We know that. Yeah. We have more than enough scientifically documented human characteristic experimentation to prove that you can find somebody to do anything if you pay them enough.
Definitely. This woman right here has a bunch of great questions. This is the last person on the list. You mentioned you received the documents under the Freedom of Information Act, and those can be found at your website, correct?
That's not correct. We have not posted all our documentation yet because we are still assimilating it.
Okay.
That's with our legal team. Now, other documents that are posted, the gag order, they can search geoengineeringwatch.org on a search engine, hopefully other than Google, where they might not find anything. Search geoengineeringwatch.org, illegal gag order. And they can see that document from PEER, Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, that's filed lawsuit to fight that gag order. So that's there, certainly.
Yeah. Another question. Everybody wants to know if you've looked into 5G, and do you think that them spraying chemicals and messing with the ionosphere has anything to do with the rollout of 5G?
Certainly. Everything's connected. There are so many layers and so many agendas going on. Now, if I can, on the 5G, we know about the 20,000 satellites projecting these signals back down to Earth. Now, in addition to the exposure, the radio frequency microwave transmission exposure that is directly related to climate engineering, how does that relate to climate engineering? These particulates, these electrically conductive particulates that the atmosphere is being saturated with, can be manipulated and are being manipulated by massively powerful radio frequency microwave transmissions. And we are not guessing. Again, I would challenge your listeners at a search engine, Bing, DuckDuckGo, search geoengineeringwatch.org Hurricane Harvey or geoengineeringwatch.org Hurricane Maria, where we captured the actual signals being transmitted in animations to show how those cyclones were manipulated by these frequency signals. You have to look at the animations to believe it. It is absolutely shocking. We capture this in real time. We stay up to the wee hours of day and night to capture these. So it's important for those fighting the introduction of even more of these signals that they understand a lot of this is used for climate engineering. And back to 5G. This is all these scenarios are so complex, and that's important to understand that it's not a simple scenario. So we have methane filling the atmosphere right now, not cow flatulence, which we have those type of narratives that make people believe that that's the only problem. That's to polarize people. Yeah. That's not the main problem. We have thawing tundra. We have thawing methane deposits on the seafloor. Bermuda Triangle, Jonathan, you certainly know about the ship sinkings, the airplanes, and so forth, right?
Definitely.
This is methane release from the seafloor because the oceans are warming, and formerly frozen methane clathrate and hydrate deposits on the seafloor, when those fields destabilize because of rising temperatures, they release in entirety. So it aerates the water, huge sections of oceans like a bottle of champagne. The ships have no buoyancy. Wow. They sink to the bottom intact. You follow me?
Yeah.
Same with the planes. Methane, even as it's migrating into the atmosphere because it's lighter than air, it can kill a prop-driven engine, thus some of the planes that have gone down. So the point I'm making, back to 5G, methane is thawing, expelling, releasing into the atmosphere. Methane over a 10-year time horizon is from 100 to 120 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So methane is literally covering the planet right now like a layer of glass. In the desperate and destructive attempt, yet one more layer of geoengineering insanity, to degrade some of that methane, not for the greater good, but to try to keep business as usual, they are trying with two projects, Project Lucy and Alamo, those are acronyms, to microwave the atmosphere, back to the 5G signals and possible other uses of them, to molecularly degrade the methane, to slow down that buildup of greenhouse gas. And what destruction might these programs cause? So like the pharmaceutical quote unquote treatment, for the human body, that's what they're doing for the planet. So you are prescribed one thing for one symptom, and by the way, here's 50 other side effects, and here's 50 other pharmaceuticals for those symptoms, and so on until the host dies. And that's the sort of mentality we're dealing with. So 5G may be also related, in addition to being a crowd control frequency, which you probably know that, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's actually stronger. It's a stronger frequency than what the military is currently using for the crowd control sonic weapons,
which should be shocking enough to people.
Yeah.
So aside from that, then there may be applications that are part of Project Lucy and Alamo to degrade the methane buildup in the atmosphere. And why is that so important? Because mathematically, on the current course, on the current trajectory, some of the frontline polar scientists have calculated that our oceans, if this methane release and buildup continues, the oceans on the planet would boil by 2080. Our planet would look like Venus by 2100. Now, let's calculate that. And again, I would ask your listeners to search everything I state. The energy buildup in the planet right now, the thermal energy buildup, the heat buildup, is equivalent right now to 4 to 5 to the heat contained in 4 to 5 Hiroshima atomic bombs per second.
Wow.
Per second. That's 400,000 per day. Most of that heat has gone into the oceans. So again, I want to state, I'm not an Al Gore fan. The environmental groups have been unimaginably hypocritical. They won't touch this issue because they're afraid of losing their 501c3 nonprofit. So they're behaving as cowards. And Al Gore is certainly a hypocrite and a criminal. I know he's reported some good data, but about his data, it's actually not nearly as severe as what the circumstances on the ground are. But he has not told the full truth, nor have any environmental groups. So back to the 5G, back to the methane buildup, that may be a part of what they're doing.
And now I can see clearly why they started pushing 20 years ago to lay the foundation for mainstream approval of their weapon systems in the future. And I'm thinking of Al Gore specifically. You know what I'm saying? It makes sense now why he came out and presented the things that he did. And I feel like he was laying the groundwork intentionally for their future weapon systems.
Certainly they try to condition the populations for that. And I want to back up to something so this might make more sense to people. You'll hear, I mentioned already in this broadcast that climate engineering was fully deployed right after World War II. For those that still are unfortunately clinging to the false notion that the planet is cooling or descending into an ice age, which couldn't be further from the truth, and I'll back that up statistically in a moment. But if we look at what happened after World War II, temperatures up to the end of World War II were going straight up. After World War II, climate engineering was deployed initially over the polar regions. It had a very profound effect. At least it shows up profoundly on the statistical record. We had a leveling off of temperatures, and those that have studied meteorology for any length of time might remember that in the mid-70s, there were some in the science community stating, we don't know why it's not warming. Maybe we're entering another ice age. That was simply a result of those academicians not knowing that climate engineering had been fully deployed. It had an effect at first, much like the pharmaceutical cure for the human body might hide the symptom at first, but the problem is still building up. So as they were able to mask the polar regions, expand the ice slightly, at the cost of destroying the ozone layer, and Jonathan, you know, where did the ozone hole develop first? Over the polar regions, right?
Yeah.
It's a result of climate engineering. So as the greenhouse gases continue to build up, eventually they overcome the temporary shading effect of putting these light scattering particles in the atmosphere. And by the way, I don't think we touched this, but solar radiation management, that's a part of what's going on, to put light scattering particles in the atmosphere to deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. What does that also do? Disrupts the rain cycle, hydrological cycle, destroys the ozone layer, and poisons everything on the ground, as we've already been over. So it's important to know history. It's important to know the meteorological history in order to know how these dots connect and not grab at straws initially. So it's a very complex scenario. And if we get to certain basic building blocks, that's where the disinformation sources can argue. For example, our legal team did a survey of 1,500 scientists, and we published that list so people know that list is valid. All their names and contacts are on that list at geoengineeringwatch.org. And here was the survey. The question was, were they willing to state on the record that geoengineering had not yet been deployed? Not one academician, not one, was willing to deny this issue on the record. Isn't that a big red flag? And I at this point, we have academia hiding in the shadows, pretending this isn't going on to try to protect their paychecks and pensions. In the meantime, on the current course, if we don't change course, starting with stopping climate engineering, none of us going to be here much longer, my friend.
I agree. Here we'll do one last bonus question. We're gonna go far off into left field here and talk completely fantasy. You probably don't know, I'm not a person who believes that aliens are currently visiting Earth. But here's another topic that has came up with their spraying. Supposedly, ancient Sumerian texts have been translated that a group called the Anunnaki came from interstellar space and had mankind mine them gold because they needed to repair the atmosphere in their planet. How's that story sound? So, and the reason I ask this, do you think they should try to find a way to do what they're doing that won't harm the people, the foliage, the vegetation, the animals on our planet? Or do you think they should completely stop? What would make Dane Wigington sit down and say, okay, mission accomplished?
Let me answer the last question first. There is no acceptable way to completely derail Earth's life support systems. That is simply suicide, period. Geoengineering must be exposed. It must be completely halted. And then we'll have to focus on the rest of the forms of human anthropogenic damage to the planet, because I don't think any rational person can argue we've been horrible stewards of this planet. We've cut down the forests, we've paved the planet, we've poisoned the oceans, and climate engineering being the most horrific assault against the web of life of all. So no, there is no acceptable way to completely derail Earth's life support systems. That is certain suicide. Back to the other question, I would answer this. We must consider the premise of Occam's razor. If we have a very verifiable cause and effect chain of events that we can document from their origin, then any leap in any other direction is certainly a leap in the wrong direction. And I'm not stating any opinion one way or the other about our part in the universe or being
Yeah.
the only life form. I'm not stating that. I don't think we can know, any of us. But when we have an absolute cause and effect, we should consider that. So to do otherwise would be to say, if you ran somebody over in a crosswalk and then tried to make the argument that it wasn't you, they died of a heart attack.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to have a hard time making that argument. So the same here. We have a very documented history of the activities of the U.S. military-industrial complex, what they use these programs for, the various layers of which we know many now. So to try to speculate in any other direction would simply be to miss the point. Whatever else is going on in the universe, we have a very factually verifiable cause and effect going on here, and we should absolutely pay attention to that.
Yeah, focus on that completely. So, to wrap it up, do you think, well, I know what you think because you just basically said it. So we need to focus on saving the planet by reducing the harmful things we're doing, not focus on spraying the skies with harmful chemicals to slow down the warming of the planet.
I think we would look at the very simple analogy most are familiar with. The definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Exactly. Man's intervention with nature has done nothing but harm from the get-go. And the notion for those who worship the God of technology that we're going to tech our way out of this, all that does is continue to dig a deeper and deeper and deeper hole. That's all.
Definitely.
Climate engineering will be exposed. And it won't be much longer because you can't hide this much longer. And I want to state this with the most clarity I can, that our equation, the equation we face of planetary die-off, is as non-linear as it could possibly be. Right now, I want to state a couple statistics, if I may. We're losing 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect a day to extinction. Those that claim that that's normal, things have always gone extinct, please look at the facts, look at the data, look at the statistics. That rate is 15,000 times the background rate. That's 1.5 million % of normal. There's nothing normal about that. At the current rate of wildlife loss, we've lost 60% of Earth's wildlife in the last 40 years, 60%.
Wow.
And we're watching political theater. And for those, I don't care what side of the fence you're on. If you're caught up in the political theater, you're missing the point. That's orchestrated theater, and I don't care what your political stripe is. Don't care. So on the current trajectory, at the current rate of species wildlife loss, we are at 0 hour, nothing left, no wild invertebrates left on the planet. By 2026, game over. Game over for everyone. No habitat, no humans. Shouldn't we be talking about that? I mean, we are literally, we have leapt off the 100-story building and are passing the second floor, and the sidewalk is next, and the landing's not going to be soft. So again, from every direction, we have converging cataclysms. We have the oceans dying, oceans die, we die, forests dying, forests die, we die, insects dying. We were the first to publish that at geoengineeringwatch.org. We were the first major source to publish that nearly a decade ago. 80% of the insects had vanished from Northern California. And the science community tried to marginalize our work. And what are they saying now? Oh, yep, it was true. 80 to 90% gone, dead. Yeah. Now,
I have friends that are beekeeps and literally doing everything right. The bees aren't even able to function well enough to preserve their own hive during the winter. And they said year by year it's getting worse. And probably what they're spraying in the skies have a lot to do with the bee die-off.
Let me answer that question, and an answer that your listeners, I hope every single one of them looks this up. I want them to go to a search engine. Again, they can try Google, but if that doesn't work, go to Bing or DuckDuckGo. Search bees aluminum. So what we also stated at geoengineeringwatch.org nearly a decade ago, that the biggest factor was the climate engineering fallout, starting with aluminum. Now, nearly 10 years later, actually it was 2 years ago, we got the bee report. So now we have peer-reviewed study to prove what we said at geoengineeringwatch.org, that the bees are dying of massive aluminum exposure. They are dying of symptoms that resemble Alzheimer's and dementia in a human being. So everything you just stated about what your friends, the beekeepers, are experiencing is exactly correct. And aluminum is the core causal factor of what's happening to the bees. And it's not just aluminum. There's other toxic heavy metals as well. But I implore your listeners to search bees aluminum. They will find peer-reviewed science study to prove that the bees are dying of massive aluminum exposure.
Wow. Yeah, I'm definitely going to look that up as soon as we get off the air. I'm going to put all your links in the description of this video, your YouTube, geoengineeringwatch.org. What is the best way that my listeners can show support to you and your cause? What can they do to help?
They can sign up on our YouTube channel. They can help to share our data because our posts are not going out to our subscribers. It has to be, they have to go to extra effort to share and so forth. But our only goal is to share credible data from a credible source. We're non-political at geoengineeringwatch.org. And again, I want to state this clearly. If our combined efforts can help us reach a critical mass of awareness, at that moment, so many wheels will turn on their own. People ask, what happens then? What happens then is people in every arena, including the legal arena, including military brothers and sisters, all realize that their days, their families' days are numbered. That if we don't stop this, that it's game over in the near term. And we must reach that point. As soon as we reach that point, again, so many wheels will turn on their own. If we can expose it, we can stop it. And on the YouTube channel, again, the YouTube channel is Dane Wigington YouTube channel. They can sign up there. Our posts, we put a weekly update out. We don't bombard people with things, only critical data. We're just asking people to help us sound the alarm. That's all we're asking. And if we combine our efforts, if we stand together, if we can bring this issue to light, we can take a quantum leap in the right direction, Jonathan.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much for coming on my show. After speaking with you, I have a ton of things to research. I feel like you got me pointed in the right direction as to where I should go next. I just want to thank you again so much for coming on. This is great. You didn't have to do that. I'm so glad. And you are a true patriot. And we all appreciate the work that you're doing for us, for our planet, for future generations. When I mentioned to my people that you were going to come on the show, they were absolutely so excited. The comments, I've never got so many questions and comments on a post. So people love what you're doing, and we all thank you, and I'm sure a lot of my viewers are going to come over and show their support to you.
It's a team effort. I'm just trying to do my part. I'll stay at my post till my last breath. I promise that. So my gratitude to you, to your listeners, and if we all stand together, we can still accomplish profound good, even at this late hour.
Thank you so much. John X Army, signing out from the belly of the beast.